My name is Joe, in case you don't know. My pronouns are he and him. Greetings to all of you on Zoom as well. It's good to see you with us today too. This is Mai Bhago, a Sikh woman who lived at the turn of the 18th century in the Punjab region of India. She lived, clearly, in a time of war. Her Sikh community was threatened by the expansion of the Mughal Empire from the south. The fighting was fierce. The Sikh army was surrounded and under siege. Their enemies offered mercy to anyone who would surrender if they were willing to denounce their faith. 40 soldiers from Mai Bhago's neighborhood accepted their offer and abandoned their army. But when they returned to their village, Mai Bhago, who was at that time just a simple village woman, she refused to accept their defeat, and she made her stand. I learned about Mai Bhago from Valerie Kaur in the book See No Stranger that we've been referring to this summer. Mai Bhago is a legend in the Sikh faith, a story celebrated and passed down through generations. Let's listen as Valerie tells more of Mai Bhago's story and what it means to her.
In the year 1705, the legend goes, during a great battle against an empire, 40 soldiers abandoned their post and returned to their village. This village woman, Mai Bhago, turned to them and said, "You will not abandon the fight. You will return to the fire, and I will lead you." She donned a turban, mounted a horse, and with a sword in her hand and fire in her eyes, she led them where no one else would. She became the one she was waiting for. "Do not abandon your post," Papaji had told me in childhood. I always wanted to be the warrior in the story, but I was the deserter too. I was the one who wanted to give up. But inside me was a woman warrior who kept taking my hand and leading me back into the fire anyway, again and again. Why did she keep leading me back? In the story, the 40 deserters who followed Mai Bhago back into the field all died in that battle. They fought for a future they did not live to see. They did not know that they would be remembered or that their fight would make a difference. They did not know that our people would go on to live in every part of the world and recite their names in every ardas, the prayer at the end of every Sikh service. Today we call the 40 warriors the Chali Mukte, the 40 liberated ones, not because they were liberated in death, but because they were liberated in life. For the warrior sage, the fight is not just a means to an end. The fight is a way of being in the world, an ongoing labor of love. The woman warrior in me kept leading me back into the field because it was the only way to keep loving the world and myself here and now. That would have to be enough.
What about you? You have a warrior sage inside you who's ready to mount up and follow Mai Bhago into battle. I know, probably not what you were expecting to hear in a Mennonite church this morning. We have a little bit of tension in the room today. The fight is a way of being in the world, an ongoing labor of love. That's the tension, the loving and the fighting, the warrior and the peacemaker, the way of the sword, the way of the cross, the Sikhs and the Mennonites. Kind of. Just in case it isn't obvious, we Mennonites tend to put ourselves over here on the side of nonviolence. It's kind of been our thing for 500 years. It's not the whole story, but that's how we see ourselves. And if you know anything about Sikhism, along with the turbans, you probably have heard about the kirpan, the ceremonial dagger that many Sikhs wear at all times. Sikhism teaches the duty to defend those in peril at all times. The kirpan was originally a 3-foot-long sword, but during the reign of the British Empire in India, the colonizers forced the Sikhs to shift to a less threatening symbolic dagger. The most widely known symbol of Sikhism is the khanda, I'm not pronouncing any of these things correctly, but that's how the summer's going to go. 2 kirpans at the bottom, a double-edged sword in the middle. And that circle, which I had hoped stood for global unity and connection, the circle is actually a third weapon, a circle of sharpened steel used to throw like a nasty frisbee. Sikhism is a warrior religion. I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. Guessing some of you are too. But of course, Christianity has a long history of religious violence in our scriptures, our symbols, and our legends as well. In this sign, conquer. And I'm also uncomfortable with that tension. So I was interested to hear what Valerie does with the violence in her faith tradition. As we've heard from Valerie before, she uses the traditional Punjabi pronunciation of Sikh for her faith. And we're going to listen, and there's some more Punjabi words in there as well, but I think you'll figure them out.
Sikhs are a warrior people. In the halls of our gurdwaras, there are portraits of our 10 gurus, our 10 teachers. The first is Guru Nanak, founder of the faith, his eyes soft and palm lifted with the inscription Ik Onkar, oneness. The 10th is Guru Gobind Singh, arrows at his back and falcon on his shoulder. He is the one who led Sikhs into battle against an oppressive empire and called us to become Sant-Sipahi, warrior sages. When you love someone, you fight to protect them when they are in harm's way. If you see no stranger and choose to love all people, then you must fight for anyone who is suffering from the harm of injustice. This was the path of the warrior sage. The warrior fights, the sage loves, revolutionary love. I had drifted from these stories. I assumed that being part of the anti-war movement meant that I had to be ashamed of this martial history. I saw all violence as reactive, confrontational, and destructive, no matter its justifications. Nonviolence was thoughtful, disciplined, and creative. I knew which side I wanted to be on. So I had thrown war metaphors out of my vocabulary and downplayed my heritage. But this denied me the ability to draw upon the strength and wisdom of my own ancestors. The fight impulse is ancient and fundamental. These ancestors fought with swords and shields, bows and arrows, because they had no choice. They did not have a sophisticated matrix of legal and political avenues to defend civil and human rights, nor international law to mediate conflicts between nations. We have these avenues today. We no longer need literal weapons like our ancestors, but we could still learn from how they marshaled the fighting impulse on the battlefield.
I like how Valerie holds the violent past of her tradition. They had their ways, they did their best in their time, we have our ways now. They did what they felt they had to do then, now we have a different set of tools in our fight as we do the best we can. She holds that tension and leaves it there. She doesn't attempt to resolve it, but instead finds that inside her as well. I think that rings true. As we read earlier, the fight impulse, she says, is ancient and fundamental. It is biological. Sometimes we fight to protect who or what we love from those who would destroy it. Other times we fight with the ones we love to protect them or ourselves. We must summon the wisdom to discern between threats that are real rather than imagined and respond in ways that give life rather than deal death. The question, therefore, is not whether or not we will fight in our lives, but how we choose to fight. It's complicated. How we choose to fight is an excellent question for sure. Some of you went through the book Fight Like Jesus during Sunday school earlier this year. Fighting does not have to mean violence, and we can and we do many times choose the tools of healing and peace and justice. That is central to who we are as Mennonites. And I have more than a few sermons about why and how we choose the way of peace. Today, though, I want us to sit with this notion that love calls us to fight. The fight is a way of being in the world. an ongoing labor of love. When you love someone, you fight to protect them when they are in harm's way. Setting aside the assumption that fight means violence, if fight doesn't mean violence, if fight means taking a stand, finding another way to step up, what about you? Do you have that in you? Are you a fighter? Again, in this sense, the fighting does not have to mean violence or aggression. It means taking action. It means doing something, getting involved, engaging, maybe getting in the way, as the Christian peacemaker teams used to say. I like how this Ephesians 6 scripture text puts it. To do everything you can to hold your ground. Some of you know the old King James Version, having done all, to stand. Love stands up. Love protects. Love perseveres. Love doesn't keep its distance. Love gets involved. Love does the work. That is the Christian theology of the incarnation. Love came and joined in the fray. I prefer the language of active peacemaking, but when Valerie talks about the Sikh tradition of the warrior sage, I think we're talking about the same thing. In the revolutionary love model, the call to fight recognizes two gifts: power and unity. In Valerie's story, the call to fight took hold of her when she was in university. After 9/11 in the US, Valerie's Sikh community faced a wave of violent hate crimes. She was an aspiring filmmaker at the time in university, and she traveled the country documenting the grief of her community. But although she was doing something, that work was important, but she still felt helpless. She didn't know how to make things better. Long story short, one night Valerie went to a dramatic performance on her campus, an actor performing one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous speeches. King called for an end to America's wars of aggression. He called for nonviolent direct action in the way of Gandhi, the way of Jesus. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. That event woke up the fighter in Valerie. We'll listen as she describes what she was learning.
Any act to change the world around us begins within us. It starts with a sense of agency, a sense that we have the power to effect change. The Latin root of the word power means to be able. When we feel helpless in the face of injustice, it is easy to give in to the idea that this is just the way things are, because it's the way things have always been. Then someone comes along and sparks our imagination, a prophetic voice from the past, or a friend on the phone. We begin to see that the norms and institutions that order this world are not inevitable, but constructed, and therefore can be changed. The Brazilian educator Paulo Freire calls this internal shift critical consciousness, the moment we tap into our own power to change the world around us. It feels like waking up. That night, I could not feel my own power, but I could see Bryn's, and she could see mine. We woke each other up. We didn't know what to do next, but we didn't have to know. We just had to hold on consciously to our conviction and be ready to act when the world said, now.
That's the truth of the fight impulse. We can do something. We have power. We can engage and make a difference. And that's the call of Ephesians, this unification power of Christ, the strength that holds all things together. That same power is within you. In Valerie's case, waking up to her power meant becoming an anti-war activist and then going on to Harvard Law School to change the world through legislation and advocacy. Sometimes love leads us to do big things, to stand up in significant ways. And other times it's not about big things, but about finding the strength to move ahead with the little things. Some of you who have been here for a while will remember that in the fall of 2018, it was a complicated time for me and my family. Carrie was in police college in Regina. I was taking care of Sarita and Nate by myself 5 days a week. And I was working half-time here, the only pastor on staff at the time, so I felt like I was trying to hold a lot of things together. Nate was starting kindergarten. That was a big challenge for all of us. There was a lot of things going on, and I felt a ton of pressure to keep it all together. I remember one day parents were invited to come to a school assembly on Terry Fox Day. I was sitting there on the floor of the gym, surrounded by kindergartners, and that day, many days, most days, I was feeling overwhelmed. And then they started playing an inspirational video of the students doing the Terry Fox run, mixed in with pictures of Terry Fox doing his run. And then in the background was this song, Fight Song, by Rachel Platten. Some of you will remember this on the radio. This is my fight song, take back my life song. Prove I'm all right song, my power's turned on. Starting right now, I'll be strong. I'll play my fight song, and I don't really care if nobody else believes, because I've still got a lot of fight left in me. I know it's not great poetry. It's an embarrassingly sappy pop song. But there I was, sitting on the floor, tears streaming down my face, everyone else wondering why Terry Fox meant so much to me, or something. I don't know. I cared a lot about what they think, but they never told me. Some part of that song rang true for me that day. Apparently it still does today. And acknowledging that what I was being asked to do was difficult. It was hard for me, and I didn't know all the time if I could do it. And at the same time recognizing that, yes, I still have a lot of fight left in me. I still had the strength when I needed it. I could do it. I could have the power. This is no Martin Luther King speech. There's no Harvard Law School there. All that song inspired me to do that day was drive the kids to piano lessons and then home for craft dinner that night. But that's life. It takes its own kind of strength and agency as well. Whatever fight is in front of you, whatever that looks like, you are not helpless. You have what you need. You have the love and the power to stand. To love yourself is to begin to believe that, to lean into that strength. That's what it means to fight. And then the second call of the warrior sage is the love of others. Here again, Valerie talks about her university friend, Bryn.
When they were our age, Bryn's grandparents, Alma and Mitsuo, were forced from their homes in California's Central Valley and sent to a concentration camp in the deserts of Arizona. They were among 120,000 Japanese Americans, 2/3 of them American citizens, including children and infants, imprisoned during World War II. They felt anguished and alone, indefinitely detained in some of the harshest desert landscapes in North America. Many of their farms and homes were pillaged. Risking his own safety, my grandfather, Kehar Singh, traveled to those camps to see his Japanese American neighbors, bringing food and company and witness. He looked after some of their farms so that they would have a life to return to when they were freed. Ancestral solidarity, Bryn called it. People of color survived oppression throughout our history through acts of solidarity. Shallow solidarity was based on the logic of exchange. You show up for me, and I will show up for you. But deep solidarity was rooted in recognition. I show up for you because I see you as part of me. Your liberation is bound up in my own. They showed up for each other. The white lawyer who fought for the sick farmer who fought for his Japanese American neighbors, and their descendants now. They fought injustice together. Bryn and I decided that that was how we would fight too.
To love others is to stand with them, to fight for them. Because really there is no them. There is only us. There is the whole of which we are a part, one humanity in Christ. That's the first half of the book of Ephesians, is this vision of Christ uniting, bringing together those who were afar off with those who are close, tearing down the dividing wall, one God, one humanity, one. And then the second half is, from that comes the strength, the power to put on the full armor of God. And again, that's not just for the big acts of power, standing with wisdom, or standing with prisoners of war. That's also in loving our neighbors, the simple things. Some of you were here a couple of weeks ago when Phyllis read a story about the Mennonite farm family whose neighbor kept letting his cows run loose on their fields. I forget the details, but basically this one guy was a jerk to his neighbors repeatedly, refusing to manage his own cattle, yelling at the neighbors when they brought his cows back to him, refusing to help them build a fence, and then yelling at them again for daring to restrict his cows' freedom of movement. And yet, as nasty as this guy was, over and over the family repaid his abuse with patience and kindness. They didn't yell back. They didn't demand payment. They didn't tell all their friends about what a jerk he was. Instead, they helped him when he needed help. They took care of his farm when he got sick. Later in life, they visited him in the hospital. And eventually, this cranky neighbor came to respect them, maybe even be a friend. Maybe they all lived happily ever after. I don't know, I forget the end of the story. But that's a pretty good Mennonite story. That was what I thought at the time when Phyllis was reading that. That's what Jesus would do. That's what we're supposed to do. Turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, and all of that. But again, that story makes us a little uncomfortable, right? Because on one level, sure, they were nice to the guy, but come on, they just let him walk all over them. They didn't have to be mean back to him, but realistically, I mean, if it was me, I would have been kind and I would have phoned the police or the church bishops or whatever community justice access there is in those days. Somebody needed to do something about this guy. Standing up means not letting people take advantage of you or anyone else, right? Yes and no and yes. For one thing, what the good Mennonites did was not nothing. They responded to his meanness, using the tools of kindness. They stood up for themselves by being good neighbors, by living out their best values, even as he demonstrated his poor values. Is that justice? In the end, their values outlasted his, in this story anyway. As to whether they let him take advantage of them, well, it depends on your perspective. From the individual perspective, maybe so. This jerk farmer got something for nothing. The good farmers had to pay the price for his laziness. But if we zoom out, what if it's not one farmer against another? What if it's about the health of the community? From that holistic perspective, the healthy part took care of the unhealthy part. The limb that was functional, the limb that could carry the burden, did carry the burden. The one that needed help got the things that they needed. The good farmers didn't stand up for themselves. They found a way to stand up for the good of the whole, perhaps because they understood that what was good for one part is good for all of the parts. Deep solidarity is rooted in recognition. I show up for you because I see you as part of me. Your liberation is bound up in my own. Fighting in the way of revolutionary love brings out both, claiming our own power, using that power to stand for the good of the whole community. A final word from Valerie Kaur.
What does it mean to be a warrior sage for a new time? Who will you fight for? What will you risk? It begins with honoring the fight impulse in you. Think about what breaks your heart. Notice what it feels like to have your fists clench, your jaw close, your pulse quicken. Notice what it feels like to want to fight back. Honor that in yourself. You are alive and have something worth fighting for. Now comes the second moment. How will you channel that into something that delivers life instead of death? Breathe. Think. Then choose your sword and shield. You don't have to know the answers. You just have to be ready for the moment when the world says, now.
I don't know if that resolves anything, any of the tension that we carry, and I think that's probably okay. If you're intrigued and want to follow this path further, a couple of books you could borrow, the Fight Like Jesus book that the Sunday school class went through, or I've got a copy of See No Stranger that I'm glad to lend out to, so you can check those out. Warrior sages. However you find to stand up, whatever it is that brings out that impulse in you, I hope that you will find ways to bring out life instead of death, to stand for yourself, to stand for the world around us, to live as one. Amen.